Enjoying meeting each other face to face again after such a long time. So just to confirm, this is the session that's going to be between you and your well-deserved lunch. The good news is this is very much about yourselves, and it's very much about how you look after your own health, about the health of those around you, and hopefully we get into a Zen state just before lunch. So I'm very pleased to introduce to Natalia Rachel, who's going to take us through a very interesting session. Natalia.
Thank you so much. The world is hungry for healing. Our task is to create the conditions and the dynamics that make healing possible. My name's Natalia Rachel, and I've been invited here today to talk to you about mental health. I'm not going to talk about the mental health crisis that we find ourselves in, nor am I going to dole out self-care tools for coping and surviving. We've been coping and surviving for far too long. It's part of the problem. In order to move the needle when it comes to mental health and trauma, we have to do things differently. It's time to heal. Healing and transformation, that's what we're going to be exploring over the next 30 minutes. We're going to look at root cause and effect, dynamics and systems, and most importantly, the role of self-mastery. It's our own healing that is the road to the social impact that we're all craving right now. Before we get into these topics, I'm going to share my story with you in a very small nutshell because it informs who I am and my perspective on mental health, trauma, belonging, culture, and systemic and sustainable change. But before I do that, I'm going to take off my shoes because I'm way more comfortable when I'm barefoot. Better. I've lived through and recovered from some of the worst things that I could ever imagine. At age 7, I knew that something wasn't quite right in my world. I grew up in an abusive environment. But back then it was just my normal. I didn't know any better. But the trauma that I experienced then went on to inform the person that I became. My personality, my body, and my relationships. I was an amalgamation of surviving adaptive responses and coping mechanisms. Unconsciously, my mission became about 3 things. 1, survival. 2, belonging. And 3, to hide, to make sure nobody knew how I was really feeling, which was terrified, confused, deeply lonely, and brimming with shame and imposter. What's wrong with me? Why am I like this? These were the questions that I asked myself daily. These are the same questions many of us are asking ourselves today or wondering about each other. What's wrong with her? Why is he like that? Why are they behaving that way? As an aside, that essential question, why am I like this, is the title of my book that's coming out with Penguin Random House in August. I'm really excited. Thank you. When I was 17, I couldn't keep it up anymore. My performative or external shell, it started to crack. And I was clearly angry and disinterested. My schoolwork started to suffer. I started talking back to my parents, and I was marched to the doctor's office. Something is wrong with her. Make her better, my mother implored. To cut a long story short, I was misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder. I was put on a triple cocktail of meds, an upper, a downer, and an antipsychotic, just enough to further scramble my already scrambled psyche. And I proceeded to travel further and further away from myself, spiraling into difficult situations, spiraling into sexual abuse, and ultimately becoming a person that I didn't recognize. After 4 years of darkness, at 21, a little voice inside my head whispered to me, and it said, "Natalia, this is not who you are, this is not your life. Do something." And so I did. I checked into a rehab facility and I detoxed off all of the meds, and out of the end of the muck of it all, there I was, diagnosis free. With the normal stamp of approval, I went back to claim my life. I got a great job in the advertising world. I had an awesome boss and the culture was wonderful. I felt safe and supported for the first time in my life. And within that safety, perhaps because of that safety, my body started to break down. It started with my gut. All of a sudden, it just stopped working one day. And about a month later, my right foot, it just dropped and froze. As a woman who had been previously physically very healthy, I was really scared. At the hospital, the doctors told me that I had nerve damage in my legs and that I would never walk again. Can you imagine being told that news? Now, I have always had and still have a very strong spirit. I did not accept that reality. I wanted to heal. I had to heal. And so I started looking for answers. But back then, the answers weren't readily available. Not within the context of mainstream health or mental health care, not within the context of complementary health, or within the realms of spirituality in the world of energy. I looked everywhere. And sometimes I'd find something that would help me cope or feel a bit better for a little while, but it was never sustainable. It never really helped me to heal. And so I continued to get sicker and sicker and sicker for 11 years. It seemed like whatever was going on was degenerative. The nervous system, the illness attacked my nervous system, my immune system, my gut, my fascia, my lungs, and my brain. The doctors told me, if the illness doesn't kill you, the medication will. You'll be lucky to see 40. Those words burned into my brain. Words have incredible power. They have the power to trap us in a reality that's not meant for us. They also have the power to emancipate us and set us free. Words are even more potent when they are delivered from the mouths of authority. At the depth of my illness, I was on 42 medications per day. I was having 3 days of intravenous treatments per month at the hospital. I was weak and lifeless, of 40-something kilos. Now, in the best shape of my life, I'm 70 kilos strong, to give you a comparison. I always tried during those years to make the best of it, to grin and to bear it, to be the strongest sick person the doctors had ever seen. And I got so much praise for being strong, a survivor, a fighter. And that praise had me continuing to try and fight, ignoring the whispers of my body and the calls of my spirit, until one day I couldn't anymore. I just broke down. When my second child was 6 months old, I ended up in the hospital, barely functioning for 2 months, and then in rehab, literally learning to walk again for another 3. There is something incredibly humbling about being incapacitated and helpless. It gives new meaning to the little popular word, vulnerability. In the ashes and the rubble of my pain, that same little voice spoke to me again, and it said, "Natalia, it is time to heal. There's a different way to be here. Listen." And so I did. I began to listen to the whispers of my body and the calls of my spirit, and not only to decode them, but to respond. No more coping and pretending everything was fine. No more coping mechanisms at all. I surrendered them all. And as I surrendered, I began to heal. But let me tell you, it was a process to heal my trauma and reclaim my physical, mental, emotional, relational, and spiritual self. but here I am. I'm pleased to report that this year I turned 40. So those doctor's words about not making it to 40 are well and truly gone from my psyche. My trauma story is not unique. There are millions of people living similar stories. My journey to heal is unique. Slowly and surely, I managed to build a life for myself full of peace and power, where I could live in ways that were sustainable, authentic, and collaborative. To me, these are the true markers of success. Well-being is success. Internal peace and relational harmony are success. The concepts that we're going to explore today are distilled from my lived experience. Yes, I am a therapist, an educator, and an ex-clinic director. But most importantly, I'm an eternal student of self-mastery, and I commit to my healing every single day. My clicker's not working, so we're not going to have any slides, I think. Let's look at root cause and effect. We don't just all of a sudden, it's working, thank you. Cool. We don't just all of a sudden wake up one day with mental health symptoms, nor do we all of a sudden find ourselves in the middle of a mental health crisis. It is part of a bigger story. There's context, just like in my story. Mental health symptoms occur when we are either experiencing threat, depletion, or do not have the resources we need in order to flourish and to thrive. Or it might mean that we have unresolved trauma hanging out inside us in our nervous systems. For many of us, both things are true. In order to really understand mental health, we need to look to the biopsychosocial health model. It suggests that our overall experience of well-being is a combination of our physical health, our mental emotional health, and also our relational or environmental health. We are multidimensional. Our nervous system is the governing place of our experience across all those dimensions. So understanding it is an important point of departure, not only for making sense, but developing pathways for healing and transformation. The core question that the nervous system is always asking as it picks up information all the time is, am I experiencing safety or am I experiencing threat? And if the answer is threat, the next question is, well, how do I get back to safety? Most of our dysregulation and distress in the world comes from an unconscious attempt to seek safety. We do it in ways all of the time. Once we begin to tune into ourselves in this way and understand our nervous system, we can more readily begin to explore and work with the 3 pillars of mental health and well-being. These are 1, capacity, 2, belonging, and 3, authenticity. Let's look at each of these in a little more detail. My favourite way to talk about capacity is the boiling pot scenario. Imagine that you are a pot of water on a stove with the heat turned up, getting hotter and hotter and hotter until you eventually overflow. That's what happens when we live beyond our capacity. We overheat, we burn out, we get triggered, we can't cope. Have you ever used or heard that phrase before? I can't cope is a dead giveaway that we are living beyond our capacity. Healing asks us to learn to live within our capacity. We need to learn to turn down the heat to a comfortable simmer, or to take ourselves off the stove altogether once in a while. We've got to learn to take things off our plates, to slow down and to stop pushing, forcing and hustling. The truth is that many of us exist in either early stage or high functioning burnout. That is part of the modern world we live in. When we make the choice to return to living within our capacity, there's consequences. Things start to fall by the wayside or completely fall apart. The bigger question is, will the people in our lives welcome our decisions, our choices to live in ways that are sustainable? Will our boundaries be welcome? This brings us to the second pillar of mental health and well-being, which is belonging. To belong is a biological imperative. We need each other. Our blueprint for belonging is set in early life. We learn how to belong and relate through relationship dynamics. Ideally, when we're born, we're welcomed into the world by our mother and our family and our culture and our community. That's where we get our blueprint for belonging. Sadly, many of us did not get the blueprint for belonging that we needed. And so it's made it very hard for us as adults to show up and belong and relate in ways that are peaceful, powerful, self-caring, and collaborative. The good news is we can always learn. We are made to learn and evolve. Belonging is both an inside process and a relational process. So while it's important for us to learn to cultivate relationships with other people, it's just as important that we go back and reform our blueprint for belonging by getting to know ourselves. We have to learn to relate with ourselves. Belonging cannot happen without authenticity, which is the third pillar of mental health and well-being. Most of us are hiding, at least parts of ourselves. We pack parts of ourselves away in order to belong. We present a version of ourselves, an external shell or performative self to the world that we think will be more palatable, welcome, or lovable. But the moment we suppress parts of ourselves, we lose authenticity, and the belonging that we seek and actually need becomes elusive, impossible. Becoming internally inclusive and externally expressed is how we need to heal. This is all about vulnerability. Vulnerability is terrifying for all of us. It's even harder because we live in a world that asks us to smile and perform and to be our best selves and reach for the stars and manifest our reality. It's not really safe for us to show up and say, well, I'm having a bad day today, or I'm not feeling well, or I'm just totally uninspired. And all of these things happen regularly. Every time we lose inauthenticity, we can't belong and we'll feel like something isn't right in the world. When we suppress ourselves, it can lead to illness, mental and physical. I mean, that was my story. I suppressed all of my trauma and it started showing up in my mental health and in my body. It took me to near death. I have worked with so many people who have similar experiences, packing away their grief, their anger, their shame, their confusion and fear, and having it leak into their bodies, show up in their mental health, or fizzle out into their relationships and the world around them. Now, not everybody's going to get sick from not being authentic. As with everything, there's a spectrum. But when we lose authenticity, we will likely feel that something's not quite right in our world. And it might be from a niggle of disconnection all the way through to feeling like we're an alien in a human body, an imposter. I invite you to consider all of the ways that you may lose authenticity every day. We all do it in very subtle ways that build up over time. Here are a couple of examples of how you might do it. One would be in response to the question we get asked many times a day, how are you? Our often inauthentic response is, good thanks, fine thanks, when sometimes the authentic answer would be, actually I'm feeling really terrible and I want to curl up in a ball and hide today. But we don't say it. Another common place where we commonly lose authenticity is when people are seeking our agreement or approval. So the question might be along the lines of, is that okay for you? Does this work for you? And our often inauthentic response will be, yep, no worries, sure, all good. When perhaps what we're really feeling inside is, actually, I don't agree with this. This isn't fair, but I'm not going to speak up because I want to keep the peace. How many times do you do that? per day, per week, per month, per year? How many times do you think that your loved ones or colleagues do that? We shift the gross amount of inauthenticity in this world by learning to show up as the complex, messy, imperfect humans that we are, even if it feels scary to do so. Our vulnerability is the path to the belonging that we all crave and, in fact, need. I'm going to take a sip of water. Now that we've explored the 3 pillars of mental health and well-being, I'm going to talk briefly about trauma. Back when I was dealing with my physical and mental health issues, nobody was talking about trauma. Fast forward to a few years later, some years later, I was building health clinics in Singapore. And we were all about trauma healing. But our market research showed that the word trauma was too confronting and wasn't consumer friendly. So we built an entire brand about trauma without using the word trauma at all. We were a Trojan horse, and we became the place to go in Asia for people that were struggling with unresolved trauma, which was often showing up as physical or mental health symptoms that weren't resolving with mainstream care. Fast forward to now, the whole world's talking about trauma. We can't ignore it anymore. We are living through a global trauma on many levels, and the effects are showing up in our mental health and in our physical health and in the way we relate with each other. Trauma is when a past experience of threat is living and breathing in us now. It moves through relationships, cultures, and communities. Trauma is generally an unconscious, non-verbal, and somatic experience. It's felt. It shows up as sensations, emotions, and relating patterns. We are very quick to dole out labels like mental health, and another one that we commonly dole out that I'm not a fan of is the toxic label. Most of our dysfunction at all of the dimensions that does not resolve with mainstream intervention has an origin of trauma. We need to stop labeling ourselves, using band-aids, and shaming ourselves and each other, or we will not heal. It's time to go to the root of the issue. It's time to have these conversations about trauma and make pathways to healing accessible and digestible for everybody. The remedy to everything that we're experiencing is in the root. Those same 3 pillars of mental health and well-being that we explored earlier are where we can find our solutions. In order to begin to live within our capacity, we need to work with energy sustainability and nervous system mastery. In order to create an experience of belonging, we need to cultivate relationships not just with others but inside ourselves. And in order to be able to show up authentically in this world, we need to start being vulnerable, even if it's scary to do so. This is the remedy. The same pillars of mental health and well-being that we can work with for our own healing and self-mastery transfer to culture transformation work. When I work with organisations on culture transformation, we draw on these 3 pillars and we actually bring the 3 big buzz conversations together: mental health, diversity, equity, inclusion, and sustainability. It's all part of one cohesive conversation. And it all comes back to our own self-mastery. When we begin to put the proper boundaries in place to promote our healing, there will always be chaos, destruction, distress, and discomfort. This is healing crisis. It's temporary. Our task is to cast our vision forward and hold ourselves and each other through it with a whole lot of compassion. All healing work comes back to boundaries. Please take note of this word, boundaries. It's very important. I've made a couple of epic transformations in my life, and they all started with a boundary, a line in the sand, a choice, an intention, and a commitment to realise it. The first was from sick to well. The second was to exit a marriage of nearly 20 years. Both times there was chaos and destruction. My life fell apart, but it was necessary for me to be able to build something new again. I know the energy of transformation very well, so as we witness the world turn on its head, and actually we're doing somersaults right now, it's as if I can see it. We are being given an opportunity to do things differently. Let's not cycle back into the same old dysfunction. We need to learn to draw boundaries around our energy, our relationships, and our authenticity. We have to do this for ourselves, and we have to do this for each other. It all comes back to our own self-mastery. I'm going to share 6 ways that you can begin to work on this for yourselves. This is a life's work. To move the needle on mental health and trauma, we've got to come back here. Here are 6 ways you can start. The first is own your stuff. Know your why. Explore your existential blueprint and all of the unconscious ways you seek safety and belonging. This is the foundation for all healing and transformation. Number 2, master your nervous system. It is the central place of our experience. If this is a new topic for you, you can find resources on my website or check out my somatic meditations on Spotify. The third tip is to be better with boundaries. Boundaries is an epic process and it's very confronting. It happens in layers over time. To start with, you can start to identify all the places where you might be lacking boundaries and see what it feels like to begin to resurrect and reinstate them. 4, make peace with your parts. Tune in to all those parts of yourself that are suppressed and listen to their stories. See what it would be like to welcome them into your cohesive expression. 5, integrate your emotions. Emotional intelligence is not only about being able to label an emotion, it's about tuning into the ways that we have suppressed them inside ourselves and how they might be colouring the way we experience and express in the world. And most importantly, number 6, extend empathy and compassion to yourself and to others through the process. When we heal, we are in uncharted waters. We might take a step forward and 2 steps back, make a huge leap, and then find ourselves back in an old black hole. It takes time, process, learning, unlearning, relearning, and most importantly, kindness. Our kindness is the greatest healing elixir of all. The goal of our healing journey is to embody peace and power. In fact, the final chapter of my book, Why Am I Like This, is called Embodiment, the Laws of Peace and Power. In it, I share everything that I believe we need to live by in order to create an experience of internal peace and relational harmony. If this is of interest to you, you can scan the QR for more information and to pre-order. Peace and power is the goal. So as we close today's session, let's take a shared moment of intention to move towards it. Thank you so much.
So my leg's gone dead there. Bit of trauma in the leg. Thank you, Natalia, for sharing such a personal story and such an inspirational story. I think there's a lot of recognition in the room, and I think what you did is you gave voice to a lot of the feelings that people have had, certainly over the last couple of years, and have recognised around them. So thank you very much for that. Okay.